This meeting is being recorded.
Hello and welcome to this first session looking at the Alexandrian Tragedy by Sir William Alexander. And that's not Sir William Alexander writing about himself being an Alexandrian tragedy. He's writing about a different Alexander, the ghost of whom we will meet in a moment. Yes, it's a play from 1607. We have done two Alexander texts before. We've got one more to go after this one. They tend to be quite chunky. In fact, as we're going on, they get chunkier and chunkier in this neoclassical tradition. So, broadly speaking, I'm just saying to the room, don't bother saying that this is quite long, because that's part of the course. We're here to find out what opportunities and options this text gives us, what it's trying to do. It's probably primarily trying to be literature rather than actual active drama, but that doesn't mean that it cannot be adapted to be more performable. As a text that is incredibly long, it would need about a third of it to be cut for it to be acceptable as a stage performance. But however, as an audio production, split into parts, it could be at its full length if we find that we're enjoying it. That is one of the many questions that we have, especially with most plays or texts from the 17th century, as they just keep getting longer. It's just something they seem to do. There's this sort of mission creep from playwrights in the 17th century, especially when they get published. I think they're holding back stuff. It's sort of almost the redux versions that we're getting from people. Anyway, to find out what this text is trying to do and how we're going to respond to it, reading in the play Meleager and chorus in Act 2, and possibly, if they're really unlucky, chorus in Act 1, is...
Hi, I'm Eric, and I was in a tragedy the day before, and now I'm already in another one.
Yeah, we're double teaming our tragedies today. Reading Perdiccas and Seleucus is...
Liza Graham in London, really hoping for my real life to not be as tragic as this.
Reading Eumenes is...
Tom from Brighton.
And reading Alexander and Ptolemy today is...
Angela, reading Alexander on one of his not-so-good days.
Yeah, he's looking a little pale, and, a little wan. I mean, you can practically see through the man. So we hopefully will be joined by additional readers, but we are slightly shorter than planned, so we shall maybe scrabbling around and throwing parts at different people who have not had a chance to vaguely take that in yet. So, without further ado, we're going to dive into Act 1, and we have the ghost of Alexander the Great sauntering on stage.
Back from the umbrageous caves, still robbed of rest, must I return, where Phoebus gilds the fields. A ghost not worthy to be Pluto's guest, since one to whom the world no burial yields. Oh, what a great disgrace is this to me, whose trophies fame in many a kingdom keeps, that I, contemned, cannot transported be, a passenger for the sulphurian deeps. Dare churlish Charon, though not used to bow, the raging torrent of my wrath gain stand? Must I succumb amidst hell's dungeons now, though all the world accustomed to command? But it may be that this hath wrought me harm. What bloodless ghosts do stray on Stygian banks, whose falls, made famous by my fatal arm, gave terror oft to many martial ranks? Yet, for a prey exposed to ravenous beasts, could never have the honour of a tomb. But though for such rude guests 2 precious feasts were basely buried in a brutish womb, thus, as it seems, the horror of such deeds with like indignity attends my sprite. What stormy breast this thirst of vengeance breeds, to plague for that which valour did acquite? Ah, might Alcmena's son, as son of Jove, once force the dreary forts of endless night, to match stern Dis in the Tartarian grove, and draw forth foaming Cerberus to light, Then leading Theseus through the dungeons dark, a second rape aimed for their ravished queen, durst he, hell's terror, force the fatal bark by squadrons pale, an envied victor seen? And in my rage may I not toss this round, till roaring earthquakes all the world affright, heaven stained, hell cleared, earth torn, all to confound enlightening darkness, or else darkening light? What though I from terrestrial regions swerve, whom in this state it may be some mistake? May not the voice of Alexander serve to make the earth tremble and the depths to shake? Or, straight returned, shall I my fortune trust, and the earth dispeople, slaughtering scattered hosts? Then Pluto plague, all charged with blood and dust, when men are killed, to be a king of ghosts. Oh, how I burst to think how some above, who for their glory did my steps attend, my offspring's title proudly do disprove, and to my chair by violence ascend. Ingratitude doth grieve a generous sprite. Would God, therefore, that a body stored I might return these traitors to acquite, my back with arms, my hand charged with a sword, as when I entered in a populous town to war alone with thousands in my wrath, whilst prizing honour dearer than my crown, each of my blows gave wounds, each wound gave death. Then thundering vengeance on rebellious bands, I would make them redeem my grace with groans, where now my ghost, empalled with horror, stands, less graced than those whom I commanded once. And yet the glory by those captains had, whom first mine ensigns did acquaint with fame, doth make my soul, whilst hating them, more sad than all the sufferings that the hells can claim. Oh, now I see what all my minions blinds to grace my funerals, that they take no pain. My state, betraying me, distracts their minds, who have forgot all love, save love to reign. But Ptolemy doth yet by time intend to Alexandria to transport me once, not moved by love, oh no, for another end, in hope my fortune will attend my bones. And must I then so great a trouble have, to whom the earth did all belong before, for some few foots of earth to be a grave, which mean men get, and great men get no more? Is this the end of all my conquests then? To be thus barred that little circuit now, a benefit even common unto men? But of these kingdoms which were thrall to me, less that a little part my body bound, the earth arched with heaven my fatal bed should be, still unconfined, and even when dead, yet crowned. O blind ambition, great minds viperous brood, the scourge of mankind, and the foe to rest, thou guilty art of many millions' blood, and whilst I reigned, didst reign within my breast. This to my soul but small contentment brings, that I some cities reared, and others raised, and made kings captives, captives to be kings, then whilst the wondering world did stand amazed, all that doth now but torture after death, which raised my fame on pillars more than rare. O costly conquest of a little breath, whose flattering sounds both go and come with there. Can I be he who thought it a disgrace to be but weighed with other mortals even, who would be held of an immortal race, the offspring of great Jove, the heir of heaven? But by many means I all men's minds did move, for altars as a god with offerings stored, till of his glory Jove did jealous prove. All kings should reverenced be, but not adored. Whilst transported with a prosperous state, I toil to raise my throne above the stars. The thunderer straight, who still doth pride abate, did wound my fame with most infamous wars. Made I not grave Callisthenes to smart, who did disdain a mortal to adore? What known unknowing, bent by foolish art, though but a man to be imagined more? All feared the danger of my roaring wrath, like lions when asleep, which none durst wake. My fury was the messenger of death, which when inflamed made flaming squadrons quake. Ambition did so far my thoughts engage, that I could not abide my father's praise. But though my friend killed Clytus in a rage, who Philip's fame durst in my presence raise. Thus, though that I mine enemies did abate, I made my greatest friends become my foes, who did my insolence as barbarous hate, and for the like afraid wailed others' woes. Those tyrannies which thousands chanced to see, as inhumane a multitude admired, and my familiars strangers grown with me, as from a tyrant for distrust retired. Yea, there were many too who did conspire by base ambushments to have snared my life. Of all my labours, lo, this was the higher. Those must have store of toils who toil for strife. And I remember that amidst my joys, even whilst the chase of armies was my sport, there wanted not a number of annoys to counterpoise my pleasures in some sort. Of those on the earth most happy that remain, as aged experience constantly records, the pleasures far exceeded are by pain. Life greater grief than comfort still affords. What grief? No. Rather rage did seize my soul, whilst big with hopes a battle bent to prove. That sudden sickness did my course control, which, cold when kind, embracing floods did move. From the physician then, though deemed for ill, I took his potion, gave him scandalous lines. Then whilst he read, did drink, yet eyed him still, and by accusing looks sought guilty signs. Not that suspicious fears could make me sad. This was the ground whence did proceed my pain, lest death my victory prevented had. For I was sure still where I sought to gain, but when that I extended had my state from learned Athens to the barbarous Indies, still my tumultuous troops my pride did hate, as monstrous mutinies unmasked their minds. I, so my name more wonderful to make, of Hercules and Bacchus past the bounds, and whilst that Memnon sunburnt bands did quake, did write my worth in many a monarch's wounds. Kings were my subjects, and my servants kings, yet my contentment further did require, for I imagined still more mighty things, and to a greater greatness did aspire. The spacious carrier of the speedy sun, all quickly thralled, like lightning I o'erran, yet wept and wished more worlds to have been won, as this had wanted room to ease one man. No wonder I was thought a god by some, since all my aims, though high as heaven, prevailed. And what man, save myself, did still o'ercome? Of all my fancies never project failed. This made me thought immortalized to be, which in all minds amazement yet contracts. I led blind fortune, and she courted me, as glad to grace the greatness of my acts. Yet I had found it a more easy thing to conquer all whereon the sun e'er shined, than mine own self, and of my passions king, to calm the tumults of a stormy mind. What comfort justly could my soul receive of all my conquest past, if that even then, whilst I triumphed, to wrath and wine a slave, I 'scaped not scandal more than other men? Ah, seizing without right on every state, I but myself too great a monarch made, since all men gape to get the golden bait, which by my death seemed easy to be had, whilst from humanity too much divorced, my deeds all hearts with fear and horror filled. I, who by foes could never have been forced, by friends did fall, yet not o'ercommed, but killed. But now I see the troublous time draws near, when they shall keep my obsequies with blood. No wonder, too, though such a warrior's bier at last doth swim amidst a scarlet flood. For as my life did breed huge broils o'er all, my death must be the cause of monstrous cumbers. And doth best become a strong man's fall, to be renowned by ruining of numbers. The snake-tressed sisters now shall never need their fatal firebrands, loathsome Pluto's pests, nor inspirations strange, whose rage doth breed a thirst of murder in transported breasts. Ambition's flames made from my ashes shine, to burn my minions' minds with high desires, each of their spirits that hath a spark of mine, to ruin all the world may furnish fires. The beauties of the earth shall all look red, whilst my lieutenants through that pride of theirs, with arms unkind, huge streams of blood do shed, by murdering of my heirs, to be my heirs. Is this that greatness which I did design? By being eminent, to be overthrown, to ruin first myself, then root out mine, as conquering others, but to lose mine own. Oh, happy I! More happy far my race, if pleased with that which was our ancient rent, I managed had the Manian power in peace, which was made lawful by a long descent. Then fair sequestered from Bellona's range, I had the true delights of nature tried, and aged with honour, honoured in my age, had left my son secure before I died. And he, inheriting a quiet state, which then, because less great, had been more sure, had free from envy, not been harmed by an hate, which of most states the ruin doth procure. But since they will unearth my earthly part, which now no badge of majesty retains, to roaring Phlegethon I must depart, far from the lightsome bounds of airy plains. And must I there, who did the world surmount, arrested by the monarch of the gods, to Rhadamanthus render an account of all the deeds done by my ravenous hosts. There, whilst with Minos Icus sits down, a rigorous judge in hell's most horrid court, with me, who pass his nephew in renown, though of his race he no way will comport. Oh, what pale ghosts are here together brought, which were of bodies spoiled by my decree. And first Parmenio, without whom I naught, but who did many great things without me. At the tribunal of Tartarian powers he aggravates ingratitude too great, and whilst the raging tyrant foaming lowers, all whom I wronged for vengeance do entreat. Yet guilty thoughts torment me most of all. No spirit can be by plaguing furies pined, though charged without with snakes, within with gall, as by the stings of a remording mind. If it be true that drowsy Lethe's streams in dark oblivion drown all things at last, there let me bury far from Phoebus' beams the loathed remembrance of my labours past.
What strange adventures now distract distressed minds with such most monstrous forms, and silence doth allow the peace that nature finds, and that tumultuous winds do not disturb with storms and universal rest. When Morpheus hath repressed the impetuous waves of cares, and with a soft sleep binds those tyrants of the breast, which would spread forth most dangerous snares, to sink affliction in despairs. Huge horrors then arise the elements to mar, with most disastrous signs. Armed squadrons in the skies, with lances thrown from far, do make a monstrous war, whilst fury naught confines. The dragons vomit fire, and make the stars retire out of their orbs for fear, to satisfy their ire, which heaven's high buildings not forbear, but seem the crystal towers to tear. Amidst the air, fierce blasts do boast with blustering sounds, to crush this mighty frame. which whilst the tempest lasts, doth rent the stately rounds to signify what wounds to all her offspring's shame shall burst the earth's veins with blood, and this all circling flood, as it the heavens would drown, doth pass the bounding bounds in all the scaly brood, rare roaring Neptune's foamy crown, whilst the earth for fear seems to sink down. Those whom it hid with horror their ashy lodgings leave, to re-enjoy the light, or else some panic terror our judgment doth bereave. Whilst first we misconceive and so prejudge the sight, or in the body's stead, the genius of the dead turns back from Styx again, which this will not receive, till it a time engendering bread plague whilst it doth on earth remain, all else with fear, itself with pain. These fearful signs foreshow all nations to appall, what plagues are to succeed, since death hath laid him low, who first had made us thrall. We heard that straight his fall our liberty would breed. This proves no relief, for many, oh, what grief! The place of one supply, and we must suffer all. Thus was our comfort brief. Oh, rarely do usurpers die, but others will their fortune try.
And that closes Act 1. Well done, Angela, especially for the epic speech of Alexander, which I really enjoyed. Actually, I have to say, it's it's a lot of backstory. It's telling us, it's presaging bad things going forward. It's got some interesting lines. Yes, it was long, but it was an entire act. It was Act 1. That was Act 1. That was all of it. So yeah, Eric.
I did enjoy the what do you call it, the image of dragons vomiting and all that stuff.
Yes, all these strange presaging bad things happening, and yeah, vomiting dragons. Dragons vomit fire.
Well, really, you should feed your dragons the appropriate food. If you feed them the wrong stuff, you just get dragons vomiting everywhere.
Well, you know what it is. They went out one night, and they had a bit too much, and one of the other dragons there holding back the other dragon's scales. As it goes. I may be running with that imagery too sillily. Other thoughts, Angela? That was obviously quite a feat, but how was it for you?
Well, it's interesting because I didn't get to read the whole thing because I've been working today, but I did read there's a prologue to this play, which helped a bit because then you realised he was at the same time he was talking about dying, he was talking about what's going on. So all these people killing each other, all his enemies who'd previously, supposedly going to look after his son, end up killing absolutely everybody. So that was quite helpful. Otherwise, I wouldn't have understood. And I wonder whether if you don't know all that backstory, could you understand what that speech is telling you?
I think some of it no, some of it yes. I think some of it is absolutely clear when he's talking about all the people fighting over his heirs, people wanting to be his heir. If only he'd left his son secure before I died, and that stuff. I think it's one of these things, and I think Alexander's got form on this, of his starts in full-throated stuff of Thing and Phoebus and Pluto and and there isn't a hook to hang your hat on early on. And you sort of have to fight your way into it. So yeah, that first sort of chunkette is quite opaque, and then eventually sort of gets around to actually talking about himself in full sentences. I don't think he ever never quite gets there. I mean, it's not a prologue. It's you're referring to the argument, the sort of the précis of the plot. That we have at the beginning.
And the fact that he's not been buried, because that's the whole point. He's not. They're so busy trying to take his kingdom, distracted by his provinces, he says, that he's not been buried even. So it's kind of ironic. I loved the irony. I once ruled the whole world, and now I can't even get like a 6 foot square to stick me in.
Yeah, and that's a fate of not a few kings actually of not getting a particularly good burial. Who've done in theory great things and then just hawked around a bit. I think William the Conqueror had a pretty ignominious interment, as I recall. I could be wrong on that one. Liza.
Yeah, and isn't in early modern terms, isn't being unburied one of the things that could make a ghost walk the earth in the first place?
Well, certainly within a Catholic reading. I don't think Protestantism lands on that.
Well, no, but Alexander's audience might. I mean, yes, he was familiar. He was familiar with the classics and history, but just I guess it's the time in relevance to the time in which he lived as well. But yeah, I do like how Alexander's ghost, you can't have a play about the aftermath of Alexander without Alexander being present in some way. And I like that the author does that by just having Alexander give the intro and tell us that these are all terrible people. And that's one thing.
Including himself, to a large degree.
Including himself. And he admits his own flaws after death, which he probably didn't during life. So he's... Yeah. And he's one ahead of all the other guys in that he does admit his own flaws, and almost no one else sees their own flaws in this play until they're on the verge of death, which is... again, a tragic thing. One thing that gets me about this play is that basically my least favorite genre is terrible people are terrible to each other.
Well, we haven't got that far. Don't go ahead. Just stick with what we've done so far. I know you know the text, but nobody else in the room does yet. No spoilers.
No spoilers.
I'll go to Tom.
I also like the fact that it really touches on the passionate, psychopathic temperament of somebody who's just hacked their way across half the earth. And it doesn't try and pretty that up. It doesn't try and pretend it's not there. It doesn't try and, in fact, it sort of like says that's what the driving force is. The rivers of blood, basically.
Yeah, I mean he's really honest. I suppose in his position, there's no point being anything else. And then we've got the chorus that follows on, that's which is presaging all sorts of bad things coming, because it's all this. Cosmic signs of death and bad things, so it's all this stuff is sort of feeding into it. Eric, and then we will move on into Act 2, where dialogue occurs.
I was just going to say that I kind of was hoping, because there's this section that he talks about, Hercules bringing back Cerberus from the underworld and so on and so forth, and I was kind of hoping that he would go into like zombie Alexander mode, but he doesn't, and I was kind of disappointed. But also, I mean, because that's what happened in a B movie, right? But this is not a B movie, so I'm intrigued to see what happens.
It could be a B movie. I mean, we haven't really figured out, what the text is going to do yet. I mean, for all we know, it's all in black and white, and there's thunderclaps, and it's all set in a. And Roger Corman's producing. Let's see where we go in Act 2. I will join you because there are 5 people in a scene. I mean, whoa. So we have Act 2, Scene 1, Perdiccas, Meleager, Ptolemy, Antigonus, and Eumenes, all in the room. And Perdiccas speaks first.
What eye not big with tears can view this host, which hath in one, as the end doth prove, a king, a captain, and a brother lost, crowned, followed, tried, by right, for worth, in love. I think amongst us all there is not one whom divers favours do not justly bind, to please that hero's ghost, though from us gone, with all the offerings of a thankful mind. Had the fates been subject to my will, So great a loss should not have crossed our life, but we had kept great Alexander still, and he those kingdoms which procure this strife. Yet heaven's decrees can never be recalled, and thoughts of harm past help breed double pain. Though once to grief a space by passions thralled, the living must embrace the world again. As one whose interest in that prince was chief, a sorrow singular my soul affects. But I will not defraud the general grief to wail apart particular respects. Though all the air still echoes plaintive sounds of widowed hopes now wedded to despairs, yet time must cicatrize our inward wounds, and to the public good draw private cares. Let us give physic to the sickened state, which at this present in great danger stands, whilst grudging subjects that our greatness hate by blood would venge their violated lands. Those who by force are thralled to be made free precipitate themselves in danger still, and this of nature seems a rule to be. What realm not scorns to serve a stranger's will? From forced obedience naught but hate proceeds. The more we have subdued, the more our foes. A sovereign head this state's huge body needs, that might make us securely to repose. And who more meet to have that great man's place of those whose states he took, who gained the hearts, than one descended from that regal race, whose birth both worth and right to reign imparts. If heavens enrich Roxana with a son, that longed-for birth a lawful sovereign brings. Until that course of doubtful hopes be run, let some be named who manage may all things.
The Macedonians, swollen with wrath, would scorn that to their king a stranger should succeed. Men obey a babe not born? What fancies strange would this confusion breed? This could not well become our grave foresight, a doubtful birth so long to attend in vain, which may abortive be, and brought to light through nature's error, made not apt to reign. But if affection carry us so far that of that race we must be ruled by some, though neither trained by time in peace nor war, as those who must indeed by kind o'ercome, then have we Hercules, the eldest son, to our great prince by fair Barsine born, who 14 years of age hath now begun his princely birth by virtue to adorn.
To think of this, it makes my soul ashamed, that we should serve a base barbarian's brood. What, should we bear the yoke that we have framed? To by disgrace have we bestowed our blood? Our ancestors, whose glory we obscured, would get some vantage of their offspring thus, that people's bondage they would have procured, and have we warred to make them lords o'er us? I'll bury this as a most odious thing, which may bring danger, and must breed our scorn. Though in effect descended from our king, they come of captives, are but basely born. O brave Leonides, I like thy strife, who with so few performed so glorious things, and death preferred before the infamous life, which bondage still from a barbarian brings. Those, loath to take a stranger for their lord, did with their blood renown a foreign field. And shall we honour them whom they abhorred, and even, though victors, to the vanquished yield? To what did tend that eminent attempt, which makes the Persians yet abase their brow, but to our country's scorn, in a contempt, to take by force that which we offer now? Was this the scope of all our conquest then, of abject captives to be made the prey? No, let us still command, like valorous men, and rule our empire by some other way. May we not use this policy a space, till time afford, or we a course devise? Lest dangerous discord do disturb our peace, still when we would of serious things advise, with majesty let us assembled be, a sacred senate, with a chair of state, that of the sovereign power all signs may see, then whilst we compass that respected seat. There those who were in credit with the king, whose merits in men's minds have reverence bred, shall, weighed by judgment, balance everything. How kingdoms should be ruled, how armies led, and what the greatest part hath once approved, to all that to that the rest will willingly incline. By such a harmony the army moved will execute whatever we design. This concord would prove happy for us all, which each man's state free from all danger renders, and by this means our Macedon shall in place of one have many Alexanders.
Though silence, I confess, becomes me best, who am a stranger and less believed, yet of our toils since I a partner rest, I must unfold my mind, a mind much grieved. And think you that a babe repairs our loss? How can good wit so grossly be beguiled, that 'tis in all countries hath been a thought across? Woe to that soil whose sovereign is a child. Nor would these great men, as it is thought, agree that they be too many bodies for one mind. Pardon, Ptolemy, I cannot be. This union would disjoin us all, I find. Thus the army from good order swerve. If many might forgive, all would offend, as thinking well, though they did death deserve. No man so bad, but some will him befriend. And when so many kings were in one court would then have many honours, humours too, which fostering factions for each light report would make them jar as neighbouring princes do. No, this is strange design to be quite suppressed, whilst all equal, all would unequal be, so that their minds by jealousy possessed from pale suspicion never could be freed. But what needs contention at this time to cloud a matter that was made so clear? And do you now account it not a crime to damn his will who once was held so dear? When the great monarch marched to match with death, whilst all his captains were assembled there, and did demand, whilst he disposed of breath, whom he himself adopted for his heir. Then, that none might such doubtful questions breed, as loving valour more than his own race, he that a brave man, brave men might succeed, said the worthiest have the worthiest place. Nor did he speak this in a secret part, with double words which might more doubt have moved, as breathing the thoughts in each ambitious heart, to have his own worth in Vulcan furnace proved. For whilst he hedged the fatal bed about, with an unequal, unpartial care distracted long, then he amongst you all did choose one out, who for so great a charge did seem so strong. He to Perdiccas did present the king the ring, and used to scale the secret of the state, by which it seemed that he designed him king, and so would seize him of a royal seat. Thus made this worthy man a worthy choice, that further strife might not the state deform. And all the world now justly may rejoice that those who raised many did prevent this storm. For if he had not thus declared his will, yea, Mars, his minions, should have lived at jars. Whilst emulation amongst equals still hath made stern trumpets thunder civil wars, what huge disorders threatens to burst forth, if that our sovereign had no prince designed, who often hath been a witness of our worth, and can weigh virtue in a virtuous mind. I see consenting signs applauded my speech, rise to Perdiccas, that which they decree, whilst modesty doth majestic impeach. Though thou cravest not this crown craves thee.
I wonder not though thus Perdiccas shrink to take this place, still bragged with new alarms. The sun must make night's ugly bird to wink. The scepter weighs too much for so weak arms. The gods will never grant, nor men agree, that such a one should tyrannize o'er us, though vulgar minds might yield his thralls to be. His betters scorn to bow so basely thus. He would have us Roxanne's birth to tend, which, though it come to pass as some expect, he can exchange or cause be brought to end. As bent to like all means when one effect, thus would he temporize, and to our great scorn, till time might help to further his designs. No king's Perdiccas likes, but babes unborn. He labors well in undiscovered minds. I need not now to insist to tell at large what brave men are amidst this martial band, who better do deserve so great a charge, both for their skill and courage to command. Yet are the best not worthy to succeed that man admired who never can be matched. The thought of whom must make our minds to bleed, whose adversaries this advantage watched. But if that great man did consent so soon that our obedience should be thus abused, of all that ever yet he would have done, I think this only ought to be refused. That valorous band, whose worth the world oft proved, then whilst their glory shine through silver shields, by all that monarchs deeds when no way moved, as conquered would have left the conquered fields. And when despising such a prince's throne, to whom his ancestors their scepter brought, what reverence would they bear to such a one who all this time was as their equal thought? To those who ere their equals raise their state, advancement envy breeds, and envy hate. If such with all would rest familiar still, this in contempt the sovereign title brings. And if they second not their subjects' will, men cannot bear with them as with born kings. Our lofty bands some lofty mind must tame, whose princely birth doth procreate regard, whose country may confound each slanderous claim, as one with whom none else can be compared. Lo, Alexander's brother, Philip's son, who was always a partner of our pain, can there be any else below the sun, or Macedonians who deserves to reign? And I must wonder what so strange offense hath forfeited his title, hath maimed his right, that any now with a disguised pretense dare wrong him thus, even in his people's sight.
None needs to wonder much, though we neglect one whose election might procure our shame. His mother's baseness justice might object, whom bastardy secludes from such a claim. But yet had nature purged the spot she made, we with his birth the better might comport, if, like his sire, fierce squadrons fit to lead, his parts were such as might the state import. He falsifies his race of wit so weak, that all his inward wants are soon perceived, all of his judgment in derision speak, by which great things can hardly be conceived. And though his body might from pains be spared, whose constitution is not very strong, but with infirmities so far impaired, that it alive cannot continue long. Yet since in state he never hath been schooled, his ignorance would rack him still with fears, whilst he who ruled, still needing to be ruled, spoke but with others' tongues, heard with their ears. A king inconstant great confusion makes, whom all mistrust, and most amidst a camp, whilst soft like wax he each impression takes, a little labour changing still the stamp. Ah, should our lives depend upon his breath, who of himself cannot discern a crime, but for each rash report damns men to death, then yields a fruitless pity out of time. Thus, while some always must his judgment sway, which still doth harbour in another's head of sycophants, this prince must be the prey, who where they list him as quite blind will lead. And since but base, that they may be the best, such still will toil that we may be o'erthrown, and to the credulous king may means suggest to taint our fame, lest it obscure their own. What grief were this to us, while such as those might make their vantage of th' all-powerful breath, and that our actions, balanced by our foes, were guerdoned with disdain, or else with death.
Since private hopes your judgments do bewitch, I'll leave this counsel where no good can please. Come follow me, all those who would be rich. Few have regard, poor soldiers, to your ease.
That shall prove best which first I went about, though some would wrest my words from what I thought. Though Alexander's spite doth now burst out, like flaming fires which burn themselves to naught. Thus naughty minds which never dream but ill do construe all things to a crooked sense. What I proposed, reposing on your will, he would interpret for a great offence. And thus puffed up, this parting hence of his to many former faults hath added one. By his seditious words incensed ere this, the soldiers are to sack the treasure gone.
With one consent, then, let us all conclude that Alexander's race, when born, must reign. So shall we establish still that sacred blood which raised our state, and may at best it maintain. And let us now, before we part, appoint who shall command till that the babe be born, and circumspectly ponder every point that success so our counsel may adorn.
I hear a tumult raised amongst the tents, and Ariodus is proclaimed king, to which the multitude soon changed consents, as bent from all those whose course a change may bring. The footmen are to indignation moved in this assembly that they went a seat, where our proceedings might have been approved, as knowing all that did concern the state. They soon forget their prince, expecting spoils, that dare revolt from what we all advised. Thus too much liberty breeds many broils, and makes the giver still to be despised. The want of discipline all things confounds. The deeds want order, and their pride all bound.
And dare they then against that fortress rise where Alexander's ensigns are displayed? Or violate the walls whereas he lies? May not his shadow make them all afraid? How comes this? And dare they then presume to brag their captains and abuse their arms? Arms! Arms! Just wrath these rebels must consume. Our countenance will them curb. Sound! Sound the alarms!
And they exit. There's a lot of politics going on here. I don't trust Perdy. There's Perdiccas there, people pushing forward, and I love that way of just going, they do construe all things in a crooked sense. What I proposed, it's not what I said. They're twisting my words. I'm sort of going, yeah, Liza.
Okay, if I can speak in Perdiccas' favor.
Oh, please do, please do. Please, all of you, speak in the favour of your own individual characters, because, I think they all have a reasonable argument to a degree.
Okay, Perdiccas' solution is the one most acceptable, I think, to an early modern person, as in, the infant legitimate son of the dead monarch should be the next monarch, and in between we should have a regency. Who gets to hold power during that regency is, of course, still a contested thing. One person, and I've forgotten who it is, one person, I think Antigonus, says that... no, wait, the
It was
other...
Eumenes, I think, is the one you think of, yeah.
It's Ptolemy who says, I think, that...
You'll have to say what it is they said for us to tell you who said it.
No, you're right, it's Eumenes, that
Yeah.
Alexander gave a ring to Perdiccas and said that his heir should be the strongest. Alexander's reported deathbed words when asked when asked who should succeed him were "hoti ti kratistos," right, Eric? The strongest.
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
Except that one of the generals standing by was named Crateros, who we'll meet later, and he told everyone that Alexander had actually meant him. So Perdiccas, you're perfectly right not to trust anyone in this room, but Perdiccas seems like the least worst. At least he doesn't lead his men out of the room to sack the treasury while the council is going on, like some people.
Yeah, the random Aridius, who we no idea who this guy is. It's just this name that suddenly pops out of the text.
Aridaeus, Alexander's brother, widely supposed to have had some sort of intellectual disability and therefore not to have been considered as a serious candidate, but some of the generals wanted to use him as a figurehead.
Did that appear in this text? Sorry, I'm going to stick within this text. Has anyone mentioned him before?
The trouble with that is that there's a lot that the author will assume that we know.
Yeah, but even so, I'm just sticking. The question is, are we following what's going on? And if the text isn't giving us data, then we need to flag that up.
The argument.
Yeah, I'm ignoring the argument because it's not a performable text. It's not a prologue that you can perform. It's just a didactic exposition of what will happen in the play. That isn't to say it can't be used as material. I have to say, it's just the way that Eumenes sort of pushes forward Perdy that one feels that maybe there's this sort of I didn't suggest me quality to the whole thing that was quietly set up. It's good. So they've got three options. You can have the legitimate son who hasn't been born yet. If it's a son, they don't know yet, not being born. There's an illegitimate child from outside of their camp, as it were, who nobody trusts. Or the alternative is they could, have some sort of a council, and they're going to go for the baby. That's going to roll the baby roulette wheel. Eric.
I was going to say that, because the line "just wrath these rebels must consume" reminded me of Star Wars, of course. So I was thinking, this is basically the sort of power void that you get after a great leader dies, and they're kind of trying to figure out they haven't worked out that they can divide the empire yet, which doesn't actually happen in any of the Star Wars films. But it is that thing of sort of vying for power. So it's kind of, they haven't decided to kill each other yet. Which
we're still at the very, very nice stage, where everyone's chatting about what to do in this power vacuum. And, the image I've got is that they're literally standing over the corpse. He's lying in state, kind of thing, which sort of connects neatly with his ghost previously. I'm also wondering whether you can actually feed bits of the ghost in, almost as asides during the council meeting. I'm wondering whether we can keep Alexander in the room. Because there's some good stuff in this. Again, there's a bit too much of it, but that's what Blue Pencil is for. But yeah, there's politics going on. You get different people are arguing their points, and there's some nice stuff. Other thoughts?
I'm with Liza. I thought that I did trust. What's his name? Hold on, I've got to get his name.
Perdiccas?
Yeah, there he is. Perdiccas. I thought that Perdiccas sounded like a very reasonable character.
Well, I'm sure they're all reasonable characters. You know, I
No,
didn't think
not.
anyone in the room felt unreasonable, actually. Really.
No, they're not. That's not true because Meleager is unreasonable. He has just said, no, this is what's going to happen. And what's more, I'm going to go off and make it happen. And so he's not willing to have a discussion of any sort. So, and just, wants power. Simple as that. So, whereas the others they are discussing it. Anyway. Right.
Well, I say we got the first three who are suggesting the various options, and then we got another two who are sort of slightly tweaking that and pushing an agenda before we sort of circle back round again. And we have news of other stuff going on, which sort of comes a bit out of the blue because it's not really signposted earlier in the scene. Yeah, we have a selection of people. It's nice. They're characters. They're doing things.
A buffet of generals, a smorgasbord, if you will.
Trying to think of a good collective noun for generals. No, can't think of anything. Anyway, I'm sure something will...
A brass button.
But that was, forgive me, that was one of the weaker options could be swayed by any faction like wax, impressed as easily moved by the next faction. Just reminds you of some of the politicians we have.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, is that this should be, to a degree, if not a totally universal paradigm, but if there's a power vacuum and you have professional politicians / generals, then there's going to be vying for power. They're gonna try and grab it, and they may use lovely words about how they're going to do it, but they're gonna try. And maybe there's a journey. Maybe they start off being all noble, and then power does what power does, and they get. I don't know where it's going. I have no idea. I don't know where it's going. Okay, next scene. We're going to need to find a Lysimachus. Angela, do you fancy being a Lysimachus? No?
That was me thinking I'd like... Yes.
Well, you said earlier that you're done after Ptolemy, so I know you've got a gap in your schedule.
All right, then.
Okay, so following this big scene, we have a little duologue, as it were, between Lysimachus and Seleucus. Act 2, Scene 2, take it away.
Lo, here a great and more than sudden change. All men for mirth were like to have gone mad, so that of late it would have been thought strange in all this city to have seen one sad. Each wall resounded some melodious song to ravish curious ears with rare delight. Strange tapestries were stretched the streets along, and stately objects made to charm the sight. As if our king his conquest so would crown of all the world a parliament to hold. He, placed with pomp in this imperial town, did of magnificence the height unfold. Here glory, in her richest robes arrayed, should have shown all that greatness would expect. Yet were our hopes even at the height betrayed. To death these trophies fortune did erect. A tragic end this triumph quite confounds. All our applauses vanish in complaints, our music marred by melancholy sounds. Lo, by the cypress pressed, the laurel faints. To funeral shrieks our shouts of joy we turn. With gorgeous garments grief cannot comport. We that so much rejoiced, far more must mourn. Days spent with woe are long, with pleasure short. This breeds most anguish when that one compares the present time with others that are past, whilst wonted hopes are balanced with despairs, which all heroic minds with woe do waste. Betwixt these two, what difference find we forth? The rising sun, and it that is declined. Where is that zodiac, lodging of all worth, whence valour's beams, still lightening courage, shined? Now desolation spreads itself o'er all. A solitary silence grief allows, as quite crushed by that great monarch's fall. How many malcontents cast down their brows! A straight suspicion hath possessed the streets, whilst every man his neighbour's fall conspires. Each one who unawares another meets, as fearing treason, with distrust retires. Of rumours strange each ear is greedy grown, which, though but doubtful, move the mind to rue, and doting still on that which is their own, what they conjecture still affirm for true.
With eyes that flame for rage our deeds heaven views, and moved for us a high disdain doth bear. Though all men's heads are heavy for ill news, and though we know not what, yet still we fear. For though the widowed world doth want a head, each member now doth labour to be chief, whilst they divers ways the body led, may give beginning to some endless grief. Some, like the fool who thunder feigned like Jove, would make their fame like Alexander's sound, and all brought low to be themselves above, would order all, or else would all confound. Then some vain wits, which only would seem wise, by flattering mirrors of their shape deceived, do everything that is not theirs despise, and perish would ere them another saved. A number too, whom all things do content, what each one thinks or still resolved to do. They make a choice, then do the choice repent, and straight repent of that repentance too. The public good is spoilt by private hope. Whilst many thus high dignities do claim, this discord gives to rash ambition scope, for all would fish within a troubled stream. See how dissension hath dissolved so soon all kind of order and confusion brought. Our council quite this variance hath undone, whilst one would have done all have done naught. Although Perdiccas, as it would have seemed, whilst for his master's race he only stood, sought by that means more virtuous to be deemed, his prince's honour and his country's good, yet his companions having in contempt, he did by subtle means himself advance, and so to shadow his disguised attempt, aimed at the royal place as but by chance. He toils that the unborn none should beguile, as by the heavens for the orphan's good reserved. Yet wanting of a king naught but the style, he would not want that when the occasion served. And Meleager, partially disposed to hinder others, doth pretend a love to bastard Philip, by effect disclosed, since he but seeks Perdiccas to disprove. And if that foe whom he doth fear but fail, he cares not much what emperor they proclaim, and his design with many may prevail. A cloak of right apparels any claim. They whose descent some title doth disclose, as by their birth made capable to reign, must be preferred by reason unto those who of all right without the bounds remain. The furious footmen, insolently stout, a title to maintain, did brave our band, and indignation thundering threatenings out, would with our blood have bathed this barbarous land. What indignity would this have been, whilst those whom he subdued with such great toils had in this sort their victors vanquished seen, so of their spoilers purchasing the spoils. Thus darkening all that we had done before, our swords first stained by ignominious wounds, we of our conquests could have kept no more but burials base, if those in the enemy's bounds. Oh, what excellency consists in the one, though oft not marked till missed clear at this hour. Some with a word or look do more alone than thousands joined with policy and power. When squadrons armed with ensigns full displayed, as Of their prince all due regard quite lost, his generous course would obstinate have stayed, by them abandoned when endangered most. Then, of disorder yielding bitter fruits, they boldly marched with brags before his tent, and charged their sovereign with unlawful suits to innovations violently bent. Of duty then they by no band detained, first grudged, grew factious next, last rebels plain. Like waters for a time by art restrained, their bounds once passed, which do all bounds disdain. But from that pattern of accomplished worth, whom imitate none may, all must admire, through just disdain, when fury sparkled forth, these troops astonished, trembling, did retire. His stately countenance calmed tumultuous sounds, and lightened majesty through clouds of wrath, that even as if his words had given them wounds, they fell, afraid of him, though not of death. Those lofty bands, which were of late so proud, that they disdained to wait their emperor's will, then by his look all at an instant bowed, did beg but leave that they might serve him still. And yet, what wonder though he gained all hearts which to his presence happened to repair, with that perfection of all virtuous parts, as large in him as in all others rare. Lo, when we meet to treat by peace or wars how all our conquests may be best secured, the soldiers do burst out in public jars, even by their captains no respect procured. And who can call that valorous prince to mind that unto virtue any reverence bears, but he must be constrained, or prove unkind, to offer up a tribute of some tears.
His death doth make my soul faint sorrow's prey, though many thought that I for it had longed. For if by any whom he should obey one can be wronged, then I indeed was wronged.
Though fame abroad by divers tongues did bring to what huge danger you were once exposed, it did not paint out each particular thing, which by yourself I long to hear disclosed.
When wise Callisthenes for no request with superstitious customs could comport, but with frank words all flattery did detest, he was abused, and in a barbarous sort. So plaguing him, no doubt, the king did ill, yet to prosperity we must impute those fatal faults which follow fortune still, as of great minds a kind of bastard fruit. We should in kings, as loath their state to touch, speak sparingly of vice, praise virtue much. But I, whose soul that wise man dearly loved, whilst his perfections spying thus injured, to tender passions by compassion moved, would his relief have willingly procured. But when my credit failed, all hope quite past, that I could purchase grace in any sort, I desperate physic did afford at last, that if his life was ill, it might be short. The king enraged that I had thus presumed to limit his revenge by giving death, that by a lion I should be consumed, did throw my doom out of the depths of wrath. But when with rolling eyes the lion roared, he by my strength, as strengthless, was overthrown, which to the king whose mind did then remord, my constancy and courage both made known. So that incontinent I was set free, by this rare proof esteemed amongst the strong, and with a mind from inward rancour free, as he his wrath, so I forgot the wrong. For whilst alone he through a forest ranged, a prey exposed, yet did no danger dream, some at that time had former wrongs revenged, if but for mischief bent to gain a name. Yet that which others did attempt in vain, and tired by travel of a surfeit died, I did perform, and brought him back again, as swiftly running as his horse could ride. And of that deed my sprite rests well apaid. For since that time my sovereign held me dear, which afterwards he to the world bewrayed, whilst by this means his favour did appear, when unawares my brow he chanced to wound, to stay my blood, which strived to dye his lance. He with his diadem my temples crowned, a happy sign, though coming but by chance. And oh, who knows, but once before I die, some good event may second the presage.
What hinders us but we should fortune try, and for a crown our travails straight engage? Those bended minds which aim at greatness still, grown popular, of purpose to be praised, do wind themselves in every good man's will, and would seem humble that they might be raised. What counterfeited friends seal truthless bands, whilst in the general cause that wit pretends, though never joining hearts, all join their hands, and work one way, yet work for diverse ends. Yea, those whose minds move in the sphere of state have purchased powers as purposed for the fields, with jealous minds their rivals to abate, whilst equals all none to another yields. Yet with suspended thoughts they doubtful stand, and their designs to venture do forbear, lest all the rest, joined by a general band, do him o'erthrow who first gives cause of fear. But he may speed who for a crown doth thirst, and free from fear with courage doth advance. Some, to be second, doubting to be first, will make their course depend upon his chance. And by a battle, if that one prevail, there will rich hopes at easy rates be sold, whilst those seek help whose fortune then doth fail, as first by hope, last by despair made bold. All this to me great cause of fear affords, lest that we too protract the time too long, and wounded be before we draw our swords. All at such times must do or suffer wrong.
No chance of late hath brought me so to bow, but I have thrown some thoughts at those high hopes. Yet in my mind that man do most follow, who doth with judgment moderate fancy's scopes. Those provinces which are to us assigned, as calm in mind, we manage muster space, till all attempt that which they have designed, by interchanging damage and disgrace. Then living, but like those whose force is small, from which the world no great thing can expect, we shall profess a favour to them all, which naught else save public peace affect. Yet then our thoughts shall not have leave to sleep, but subtle plots must circumspectly frame, those whom we fear at variance still to keep, so always strengthening us and weakening them. If wrongs provoke, or when occasion claims, we may make war with some ere it be long, like cunning wrestlers at the Olympic games, who exercise themselves to be more strong. And when themselves have thus prepared the way, whilst that their pomp doth bear a lower sail, for at the last their force must much decay, since all must always lose though one prevail, then prompt to tempt that which we now contrive, by ruining the remnant that remains, we may possess the state for which they strive, thus they the toils, and we shall get the gains.
And they exit, leaving the chorus.
Oh, happy was that guiltless age when as Astrea lived below, and that Bellona's barbarous rage did not all order quite overthrow. Then whilst all did themselves content with that thing which they did possess, and gloried in a little rent, as wanting means to make excess, those could no kind of want bemoan. For craving naught, they had all things, and since none sought the regal throne, whilst none were subjects, all were kings. Oh, true bliss their course was set, who got to live, not live to get. Then innocency naked lived, and had no need nor thought of arms, whilst spiteful sprites no means contrived to plague the simple sword with harms. Then snaring laws did not extend the bounds of reason as they do. Strife oft begun where it should end, one doubt but cleared, to foster two. By conscience then all order stood, by which dark things were soon discerned, whilst all behoved there to be good, whereas no evil was to be learned. And how could any then prove naught, whilst by example virtue taught? Then mortals' minds all strong and pure, free from corruption lasted long, by innocency kept secure when none did know how to do wrong, then stinged with no suspicious thought. Men mischief did from none expect, for what in them could not be wrought, in others they would not suspect. And though none did stern laws impart, that might to virtue men compel, each one by habit in his heart engraved the law of doing well, and all did wickedness forbear of their free will, and not for fear. The first who spoiled the public rest, and who did disturb this quiet state, was avarice, the greatest pest which doth of darkness fill the seat, a monster very hard to daunt, lean and as dried up with inward care, though full of wealth for fear of want, still at the borders of despair, scarce taking food for nature's ease, nor for the cold sufficient clothing. She whom her own could never please thinks all have much, and she hath nothing. This daughter of stern Pluto still her father's dungeon strives to fill. That monster tamer most renowned, the great Alcides thieves' glory, who for 12 several labors crowned, was famous made by many a story, as one who all his time had toiled to purge the world of such like pests, who robbers robbed and spoilers spoiled, still humbling haughty tyrants' crests. He, by this monster once overthrown, did pass in Spain o'er lands and floods, and there took more than was his own. What right had he to Geryon's goods? Thus avarice the world deceives, and makes the great conquerors slaves. When to plague the world with grief, this poor rich monster once was born, then weakness could find no relief, and subtlety did conscience scorn. Yet some who labored to recall that bliss which gilded the first age, did punishment prepare for all who their thoughts to vice engage. And yet the more they laws did bring, that to be good might men constrain, the more they sought to do the thing by which the laws did them restrain. So that by custom altered quite, the world in ill doth most delight.
And exit. Okay, that's a complex scene that we've just had. A really interesting chorus as well, actually. I'm not always a fan of choruses, but that was actually doing some really interesting work. Some really nice ideas bouncing around there. Some really nice lines popping up here. So this little duologue that we've got here, I mean, it starts off as going, God, there's some really bad shit going down. Oh, look, this is what everybody else is doing. And then it sort of goes off on a tangent when they go, do you remember the good old days? Oh, do you remember Alexander? He was great. They don't use his name, which would really help at that point, because I just sort of going, who are they talking about? Who's this? His? And it took me a while. And then it goes, yeah, we should just let everyone fight it out and then take over. And it's almost like it's not signposted really at all in the scene, and I love it. I just love it. It's just actually that it sort of creeps up on them in a way. I'm sure they're actually digging into it. There might be little bits, but it starts off as just like, oh, it's just exposition, and it's just since the last scene, things have moved on and progressed, and things have got a bit worse. But no, actually, it's active plotting from characters, and I really like that. Angela.
Well, there's this little bit, isn't there, where Lysimachus says that after he got back into Alexander's good books, there was this sort of accidental moment where Alexander put his own crown on Lysimachus's head. And that seems to spark the thing, well, why don't we try for it then? So there is this like little moment, isn't there? This little transition where he goes from saying, yes, Alexander loved me in the end, to he put his crown on my head, and then, actually, why don't we go grab everything?
Yeah, and I do quite like the little WTF moment of Lysimachus' story saying, yeah, he tried to have me eaten by a lion, but the lion respected me too much to eat me, and then Alexander respected me too. and I mean, it's interesting that Lysimachus proposes it, but Seleucus doesn't actually say yes. Like, it's possible you could have a handshake or something, but Seleucus's general drift is that no good can come of this.
Oh no, I think he's more talking about timing. He's really worried about, if we get the timing wrong, we're screwed. Is sort of his last thought, and he's going, no, we and Lysimachus is just going, no, bide our time. We time it right. So you're right. He doesn't explicitly say it, but he does seem to be. He's the one pushing it. He keeps nudging us forward because we're going from past stuff to future stuff, as it were, in that speech.
Yeah, I mean, I do quite like the line at the end of his speech that all at such times must do or suffer wrong. So there's no morally right choice here. If you make the morally right choice, you're going to get killed.
Eric.
I was just going to say that it might, like, going back to Liza's point about Seleucus not actually committing by saying yes, let's do this. It might also just be, I mean, me being a cynic and sort of having read too many spy things, might just be going, yeah, I totally don't agree with you, but I won't say anything. I will just observe you from such a close proximity to sort of, which seems like something that you would do not in a history play, but like in a play about court kind of thing, maybe in a Marston play. But yeah, I don't know if you would do that in a tragedy.
And also just earlier, one of the lines that leapt out of me I particularly liked, when they're talking about all these people fighting amongst themselves and they want power. They make a choice, then do the choice repent, and straight repent of that repentance too. I'm not saying that this has any resonances with anything today. That just people who want power but actually haven't got a clue how to wield it. Eric.
Also, then you sort of get this weird, almost morality thing from the chorus, which is, it's like, hey, those morality plays that we've been watching. Maybe they're useful, but it's kind of weird that it goes with like avarice as one of the first sort of, rather than covetous, for example. I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
I think they're the same.
Probably, but I mean, it's just interesting that that's sort of the original, the choice made here, rather than sort of, I don't know, something else.
So they're talking about innocency versus corruption throughout it, and that's avarice is the greatest pest, and it's really nice. I'm liking that. Liza.
Yeah, that it's a sort of commonplace that greed is at the root of all evil. Radix malorum est cupiditas, and I think that may be what they're driving at here. But what intrigued me was at the very top of the chorus, before the golden age, the golden age portrayal, was, "Oh, happy was that guiltless age when as Astraea lived below," and from 1607, that reads very much like nostalgia for Queen Elizabeth, doesn't it? Astraea was a name she was known by, and obviously it wasn't entirely the golden age. People didn't walk around naked and sinless, that we know of, but
I'm sure you'd end up in the ecclesiastical court if you tried.
Well, you wouldn't technically be violating any sumptuary laws, I guess. But I don't know. There might be that kind of overtone to it, possibly.
No, I like that. I hadn't picked up on that at all. But yes, no, absolutely. Another one of the code words for Elizabeth. Yeah. We have one more scene to go for this session. Eric, before we do so.
I was just going to say that I like it how the concept is basically like, well, they were all innocent. There was no corruption because, they were all sort of inclined to do good because they were led by good people kind of thing. But that kind of just like, if you don't know what bad is, then how do you know what good is kind of thing? It would be the modern take on this, which is kind of breaks the play a bit. I don't know, just, yeah.
Right. Well, we're diving into the beginning of Act 3. We're not going to finish this session. The acts are not necessarily very even. Act 3, Scene 1, Perdiccas and Eumenes return.
Now fortune smiles upon my rising state, and seems to promise more than I require. Lo, by degrees my glory doth grow great, and by their death, who did my death conspire. Proud Meleager, who disdained to bow, and my advancement always did mislike, hath with his blood sealed my assurance now to fright all those who would attempt the like.
Yet of his fall the form my mind appalls, even as Jove's altar, and without regard, we were too rash to violate those walls, which the most impious could not but have spared. Licentious Ajax wins Minerva's spite, erst for profaning such a sacred place. On the Caspian rock did lose the light, and all his navy too for one disgrace. We should not irate celestial powers, and all beginnings are considered most. Such horrors breed which odious acts of ours, that we, I fear, opinion's powers have lost.
Let others seek to keep such points as those. I am not scrupulous, for I protest o'er all, and by all means I'll kill my foes, and then thereafter argue of the rest. They wrong the gods who think their church should be a refuge free for malefactors still. For with their justice this cannot agree, who guard ill-doers guilty are of ill. And was he not stained with many a monstrous crime, and salamander-like amid the fire contentiously disposed did spend his time, and never pleased did still some change require?
One humorous head that doth in brawls delight, might poison thousands with their gall of spite.
As still seditiously affecting strife, he but abused the credit of his king, and sent some of his slaves to take my life. Such bitter envy did his stomach sting.
I saw how that advanced before your hand. You first did check, then chase them in the end, and did with courage resolutely stand. Our sovereign's corpse, though dead, bent to defend.
He but a dastard is who basely yields, and in no conflict hath his fortune tried. We, if in time not venturing to the fields, like beasts all sacrificed, had poorly died. But when without we masters did remain, lest Babylon had straight been barred from food, I those proud squadrons quickly did constrain, even as we pleased a treaty to conclude. Graced, whilst my foe, as in some kind compared, a chief in charge, he many minds did sway. But found inferior when a friend declared, my credit did increase, and his decay.
Yet in this course all who observe do see, that of the multitude the mind prevailed. He whom they did elect our prince must be, and our design hath altogether failed. But how comes this, that every captain gets a certain realm committed to his charge, and with an army bravely forward sets, their bounds allowed to guard or to enlarge?
I, by my means, have every great man crowned, that from my greatness great things might proceed. Yet by that means to make my power renowned, the doing liked me better than the deed. I this division chiefly did procure, to have those great men from the court removed, where they might be employed, yet I secure, their favour purchased, or at least thus proved. For him who hath them to such honour brought, they must be bound to hold in high account, and their advancement for this end I sought, that by their means I with more ease might mount.
Oh, but your fancies may be much deceived. there is no bound that can bind unthankful minds. I fear the favour that they thus received hath shown them the ways to sail by other winds, so long of late as they that had need of you. To seem your friends they, counting kindness, sought, but since their greatness is well grounded now, they will disdain their degenerate in naught. So those of all great men friends must frankly prove, whom for their pleasure freely they affect. And loathing bands cannot be forced to love, as brave by worth where merits urge respect. Few mark from whence they rose, when once aloft, now none can endure that they should owe their state. Deserts grow odious when unbraided oft, and there depraved, not gurgeoned when too great. Yea, in my judgment you have greatly erred, and then to exalt those states you would surprise. Their custom, their common custom is who are preferred, that they that stand not to let others rise.
To ruin lofty minds when least afraid, whilst careless carriage jealous censures shift, by spies abroad to foes at court betrayed, than by preferment, what more subtle drift? Their hearts with hate all are parted all by pride. One is already to confusion gone. I long to hear how Leonatus died, not that I mind his funerals to bemoan.
That prince magnanimous whom all admire, as was his custom, elementary proclaimed that banished Grecians might to Greece return, save only such from whom murder had defamed. But who them banished grieved for their return, did fear that just revenge might have designed, as knowing well, whilst wrongs make wrath to burn, how misery doth irritate a mind. The indignation which they had conceived did breed rebellion bursting out with rage, and which our king, deep in his mind engraved, by Athens' spoils did purpose to assuage. But since the death afforded them relief, grown bold to persecute their proud attempt, the Athenians and the Aeolians were the chief, who brought Antipater first in contempt, and by their power constrained to quit the field. He, in a little town enclosed at last, was once reduced in danger near to yield, and stain the glory of his actions past. But yet by accident, as oft it falls, it's better to be happy be than wise. An unsuspected shaft thrown from the walls, their foe's chief captain happened to surprise, and did Antipater in his courage rear, which had almost he staged, hopes betrayed, yet still in doubt and not quite free from fear, he, Eumenes, did entreat for aid, and he who seemed his friendship to affect, to further him desirous did appear. But if he had prevailed, some do suspect, Antipater had brought his successors succor dear, yet by the end his purpose to bend to show. However, in effect, he seemed to be a friend. But when the Athenians did his coming know, they him to fight did all directly tend. And though their thoughts in depths of doubts did fleet, then when alone to match him though is best. And whilst they marched their adventurous troops to meet, did hardly welcome the unwelcome guest. when both armies were to battle brought, and show with what bright flames their breasts were stored, brave Leonatus like a lion fought, so to prove worthy of his wanton lord. But whilst he bravely did his change acquite, yet lost himself whom others came to save, and by their captain's falls discouraged quite, his scattered troops gave great damage did receive. When old Antipater was sure told of this mishap, who came from his relief, he not one sign of sorrow did unfold. A little gain doth mitigate such grief. Well did he know that though his foes prevailed, yet this great fight enfeebled their host. And then he took to him, which must availed, those beaten bands who had their captain lost, yet that in which he did most comfort find, was in delivery from a secret foe, who did with jealousy torment his mind, though outwardly not seeming to be so.
Thus we who erst below one ensign ward slept in one tent and all one fortune proved, and with a friendship then that never jarred like Pylades and mad Orestes loved. Since that we want a lord, and all our lords, we lo renounce all kind of kindness now, and secret rancor budding in discords do others harms procure, at least allow. Such is the sacred famine of a crown, that it to satisfy before we fail, what in our way doth stand, all must go down, and bonds of blood or friendship not avail. These glory-ravished souls that would be great no means omit, although they be unjust. None bears with patience partners in the state. What jealous lover can his rivals trust?
Well, I perceive Antipater does tend with all his power to gain that sacred prey, whose means of late enlarged to read his end. Through every danger may enforce a way, and Alexander sometimes spake at large. Then, whilst Antipater with Agis strived, that he, without the limits of his charge, more like a king than a lieutenant lived. Antigonus and Ptolemy in arms are joined in one, our ruin bent to breed. I fear that friendship procreate our harms, unless their spite prevented be with speed.
I'll lodge you now, Eumenes, in my breast, and let you see the ground of my intent. Since that we both alike must toil or rest, as those whose courses have but one event, since at his death I by our dying lord was in his place appointed to succeed, and that my fortune doth a means afford how I may compass that which he decreed, to leave that place I cannot well agree, as if I wanted courage to command. I'll take that which the fates do force on me, for if without a throne I cannot stand. And those who would perform difficult things must not regard what way so they prevail. Oft fraud then force a greater furtherance brings. The fox must help if that the lion fail. So old Antipater to have betrayed, his daughter I in marriage did require, that so the time might but have been delayed, till that I had accomplished my desire. For with the shadow of pretended love and hoped affinity, which seemed designed, I from his bounds some bands aimed to remove, by raising me that he might have declined. But who can snare a mind all eyed with fears? He quickly did mistrust the purposed wrong, and from my messengers straight barred his ears, as did Ulysses from the siren's song.
Yet this, if rightly weighed, might much import, if that you match yourself with such a mate, whose beauty, pleasure, birth might bring support. and both concur in one to bless your state. If you, to make your high attempts more sure, by Hymen's means with some yourself allay, thus of some prince you may the power procure, on whom for help you boldly might rely. What grief were this, if you have hap to gain that fair idea which your fancies frame, if after you none of your own remain, to keep your conquests and receive your name. Kings live most safe whom of their own have heirs, whose sacred persons none dare seek to wound, since though they die, yet there rest some of theirs, who are to venge their death by nature bound.
All shall be tried which may enlarge my might. I mind to match myself with such a one, who, if she have my power to prove her right, may be thought worthy of her father's throne. I with Olympias have devised a thing which may secure her state and make mine strong, and if accomplished prove a prosperous spring, from whence may flow great acts ere it be long. By Cleopatra may a means be catched, which to a glorious end our course may bring, she whom at first her father Philip matched with Alexander of Epirus king, who, having heard great Alexander's fame in emulation of that monarch's praise, went with his troops the Etrurians bent to tame, which enterprise did but abridge his days. In marriage with that widowed queen combined, if that her mother thus her course assist, whilst I perform that which I have in mind, who dare presume my purpose to resist? For whilst this friendship doth my name renown, it may my thoughts from further fear seclude, since having thus a title to the crown, as one engrafted in the royal blood.
I fear that this your purpose to prevent, a number now take arms all in one form, as those whose fears conjecture your intent, and by lowering clouds for now a storm, already many do turn, do together run, who for your ruin woefully thirst.
Where do you think that we should then begin and exercise hostility at first?
Though we ourselves in strangers' thrones install, and having Asia to subjugation brought, make Nilus, Indus, Euphrates thrall, yet all those victories would serve for naught, whilst Macedonia doth continue free, a fertile field to bring brave armies forth, which till first forced can now not subject be, and ere they love a king must prove his worth. Then unto those who seek a prince in arms, his chiefest realms their greatest vantage gives, where wars held arms are always with his harms, since that his foe still at his charges lives, and wars protracted with a people's loss, do from their sovereigns alienate their love. Those lose their hearts whom fortune once doth cross, and foiled at home can nowhere else remove. Whom Macedonia hath still the best, which of our state the stately mistress is, as which with courage conquered all the rest, but depends on Mars as only his. If you were lord of that undaunted soil, and by Olympus and countenance but a time, straight with Antipater all would recoil, and bent unto him we would find a crime. To you who are Macedonian born, if marched with Cleopatra great in powers, the Macedonians gladly would be sworn, and if commanding them, then all were ours.
And yet this opinion partly I disprove, which would not, as you think, our troubles end. For if we do from hence our force remove, and to the Amathian bounds directly tend, there must at first a doubtful war be proved, with those brave bands whose valour is well known, of whom Craterus dearly is beloved, Antipater is born and bred their own. And though indeed, as kindly to those parts my friendship may affected be by some, yet those who start in time by many arts may undermine their minds before we come. Then whilst we trouble Macedonia most and leave those realms unarmed, which now are ours, straight Ptolemy, when strengthened is his host, may like a tempest swallow Asia's powers. I, for the time, most willingly would take the course which seems to make our state most sure. A foe is dangerous when behind one's back, who whilst not looked for may our harm procure. My purpose is, though yet to none made known, that Egypt shall first burdened be with war. For if that Ptolemy were once o'erthrown, then that from Greece all hope of help would bar.
Hold still with those of the sacred blood, whom to protect you always must pretend. The countenance of the great may do much good, whom still, though weak, all glory to attend.
And thus ends Act 3, Scene 1. A much harder scene than some of the early ones. There's the early ones I'm sort of going, well, I might trim a bit here, might move through things here. This one I found a lot harder work. It started really well, and sort of Perdiccas coming in and going, I'm doing really well. Look, Meleager's dead. Ha ha! I'll kill my foes by all means, and then thereafter argue of the rest. It's Eumenes sort of going, well, maybe we should think about planning ahead. Perdiccas has got a plan. He's got plans. I think some of us have doubts as to how achievable his plans are. Thoughts from the room for this one about where this scene is sort of throwing us around. Angela.
I think this is where we get our comeuppance from there having been quite so many captains with quite so many plans and quite so many provinces in Alexander's vast empire, because it's hard to take it all in. And it's interesting how, Alexander says at the beginning, why couldn't he have been satisfied? Why couldn't he have been satisfied with what he had and then just ruled it to be secure? And all these people are continuing that. So in this last scene, they're saying, all right, okay, we've captured Asia, but what should we do now? And then they're saying, well, what we really should do is go and get Macedonia. That's what we really need to do. So it's sort of like, you just think, stop.
It's one of those things about empires that sort of hold themselves together by projecting their power onto other people, and there comes a point when you just can't do that anymore, and it all just falls apart and turns to mush. Tom, then Eric.
Thank you, Bill Gibbons.
Yes.
I thought the scene, although long, was interesting. It wasn't all plotting and subterfuge. It was just like the mundaneness of the toil of the plot and counterplot, and it was like just a strange scene that just gave some sort of like I don't know, a very mundane, tired twist to it all. That it's not all plotting and glory and jumping on bandwagons. It takes two, or it takes two, and both have to be aware of the toil of the whole thing. It's a strange scene.
Yes, the toil of looking after, constantly expanding an empire and holding things together is, yes, we have in other texts as well. So yeah, it's a well-trodden theme that this text is doing something with. Eric, then Liza.
Yeah, I'm trying to formulate my thoughts, but I'm not entirely sure. So Perdiccas' strategy is basically like to marry into royalty kind of thing, which doesn't really seem like the best plan unless he's kind of trying to secure an heir, if that's the point. And the sort of, yeah, and I'm just fascinated by the fact that you get this sort of spotlight on these two characters who are kind of one faction of the whole thing, and they've already killed. Well, one of the other characters has already been killed off, as mentioned. Yeah. Whereas in the previous act, we got all the sort of Machiavellian sort of what makes a leader a good leader, rather than sort of who should be leading. I mean, it was also who should be leading, but like sort of, yeah, what are the qualities of a good leader?
Liza.
Yeah, I mean, that is the essential question of that first group scene. For Perdiccas in specific, his problem is that although his military record is really strong, he seems to be basely born, or at least not royal. And this scene, as well as giving exposition to the audience about what has happened and who is alive and who is dead and what is the state of play, as well as doing that, this scene it's very West Wing. In fact, they're very much strategizing between themselves about. Okay, so we have Asia. We can hold Asia with military might. The bits that Alexander just conquered, we can hold those. I've made all the other guys who were my rivals. I've made them essentially into my client kings, satraps ruling little provinces of their own. So we've got that sorted. But then, how do we hold Macedonia, which is where Alexander is from? His mother Olympias is still living there. Cleopatra, not that Cleopatra, seems to in this be Philip's daughter. I don't know if she's also Olympias's daughter. I think she's Philip's daughter by someone else. But she's of Macedonian royal blood, so if Perdiccas marries her, he then has a claim to Alexander's land of origin. Meanwhile, Ptolemy is holed up in Egypt, and Perdiccas doesn't like that at all. He wants to then invade Egypt. Big mistake, as it turns out, but no spoilers.
Yeah, I mean, it's this thing of who do you fight next? Do you deal with Ptolemy and the others, or do you go on a different campaign? Who do you fight next to secure your position? Real term decisions. Okay, around the room for final thoughts. So we got a text that. We already know it's outside of, say, a media sphere of audio or video or similar, that this is a text that would need to be cut. And certainly some minor adaptation in terms of putting people's names in more often and a little bit occasional sort of hints at exposition that we're not necessarily always getting. But apart from that last scene, I've really mostly enjoyed these scenes. I've been looking at them going, okay, I'll trim a bit here and I trim a bit there. But actually, there's something going on here that actually works quite well. And there's some good dialogue again. When he's in the zone, I think he writes some really, really nice lines. It's just every so often he sort of drifts off and just writes a scene, and you don't quite get the focus of the narrative, and we will, as we go on, I'm sure we will discover some more of those sort of slightly disjointed elements to the narrative, the way that people just randomly die and you don't really get any satisfactory sort of follow up on that. So today it was Meleager. Others may randomly disappear as well. So you don't necessarily, because this is the Alexandrian tragedy. The tragedy is everything that's happened after Alexander's died. So I don't think it's supposed to have a focus. It's supposed to be slightly chaotic, and that's sort of interesting me. And whether that's I almost wonder whether we just should have more Alexander. Anyway, final thoughts from around the room. I'll go to Liza first.
Yeah, further to what you were saying is in Alexander's William Alexander's written introduction, which we didn't read. At the end, he says, "Which multitude of murders gave to him the crown of Macedon, and to me the subject of polytragic tragedy." And I do quite like that phrase, polytragic tragedy. That this isn't one person's tragedy. It's not a tragic hero with a tragic flaw that leads to his tragic end. It's that it's as Robert said, a tragedy of chaos. Yes, none of these people are good, and all of them are going to probably get more or less what they deserve.
But are they bad? I mean, have we met anyone who we would argue is actually, I'm sure they're not doing nice things. None of them have done nice things. They're generals. It's the nature of the beast. But are any of them villains?
I'd say that Meleager was kind of a douche. I don't know if he's evil, but he's definitely a dick.
And he's a dead dick, so, he got his comeuppance quickly. Tom, any final thoughts?
I liked it. It was, as you say, it's drastic cutting, but it's nice storm clouds of different factions, and as for that point, they're thrown into a situation, they can't avoid it. There are many factions that they have to weigh and counterbalance. But yeah, no, it's dramatic, and it's building beautifully.
And there's some interesting things, like the way Perdiccas is talking about how fate is pushing him in a certain direction. Now, that could either be hubris, or it could be I'm trapped. I have to follow this path. I have no other direction to go in, and that's something that only I think production can necessarily pull out of the bag. Angela, any final thoughts?
I agree that the text, the speeches. I was really surprised. Faced with like matters of it, but I was really surprised how incredibly easy to articulate, as it were. They are. They're full of passion and an emotion and movement. I mean, there's too much, and it needs to be cut down for us modern minds. But that has really surprised me. So the writing is amazing, and the story is complex. There's no getting away from that. But I think I'd agree with Robert, actually, that each one of these men has virtue. That they have been great, apart from the douche, but they've been great. They've been great men. They are great men. They were selected by Alexander because they were great men, and none of them can cope, as Tom said, with the situation they're placed in. That's the tragedy. So that flaws inevitably emerge. So it is a great human tragedy, isn't it?
Eric, any final thoughts?
Well, I guess it's kind of because, like, looking at any tragedy or any situation after a leader dies, where, like, a great leader, like after Queen Elizabeth died, there was this, power vacuum isn't exactly the way to put it, but yeah, after being a stable nation for so long, they must have struggled, handing over the reins to someone else. After
Living Scott.
After I don't know, Julius Caesar died, they must have had similar things, especially so violent a death. Anyway, I mean, it must have been like problems of governance of this type. It must have been quite an interesting issue, and this is like, I mean, because this is the aftermath, sort of like, what do you do after the shit has hit the fan, so to speak? I don't know if they had fans back then, but anyway, I'll just go with that.
Different design.
Dragons.
Different design.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just an interesting play, and sort of all the things of they're not really concerned with what has Alexander done right. They're more concerned with what can we do right to get power, and then we'll see.
Yeah, because I think someone said at some point, we have to fight for power because otherwise we're going to die. And it's this situation you've got to fight. I think I'm almost leaning into a Game of Thrones quote, so I'm just gonna pull back there. But there's not much you can do about it. You're in the great churn of history, and you're gonna get eaten by the machine of events.
I got more good, the bad, and the ugly. When they've all got guns and they're all staring each other down. But it is that situation. They've all got guns and they're all staring each other down, and who makes the first move? And how do you win? Well, you shoot do you shoot the fastest? Do you make alliances? So I like the tension. Yeah.
Okay, well, we have 2 more sessions to cram in more of the Alexandrian Tragedy. We're going to find out more about its potential as a performative text, especially as it may indeed fit into other Alexandrian texts that we have touched on before and will touch on in the future. We like to build seasons and connective tissues of work and things to see different interpretations. I mean, it's a very different interpretation of Alexander full stop, actually, at this point. So that's quite an interesting element that we didn't really touch on very much in the room. But anyway, all that remains to thank all the wonderful readers for all their wonderful reading. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye. Dragons vomit fire.